thank you for Just Trees for their support.
Hunter Industries is a family-owned global company that provides high-quality, efficient solutions for irrigation and outdoor lighting. A diverse range of products can be seen everywhere, from residential landscapes to stadiums, national landmarks, theme parks, city parks, commercial complexes, hotels, and municipal buildings around the world. Whether you're from New York, Shanghai, Sydney, Paris, or Cape Town, the odds are you've probably encountered Hunter product somewhere along the way.
Okay, while we're waiting for the presentation to come back on, our next speaker is Professor Wilhelm de Beer. He's from the Forestry and Agricultural Biotechnology Institute, or for short FABI, at the University of Pretoria. And we asked him to give us an update on what is going on with the Shothole borer. Wilhelm, are you ready?
Okay, so I'll do a screen share just now with my presentation. But I just wanted to say it's interesting that that I'm following on Davy Root this morning. There is sort of a link between us at FABI at the University of Pretoria and Davy, in that his daughter has been doing an honors, a master's, a PhD, and she's now a postdoctoral fellow in our institute. She's a tree geneticist and a very competent one at that. So at least I can say one thing, and that is that Davy hasn't brought up brats. He's brought up very intelligent young children and very competent scientists. So so I'm going to give you a bit of a background again and just update on where we are in terms of research in South Africa with the polyphagous shothole borer, but also what's happening in our cities and in our towns, which is slightly scary. So Davy has been talking about the dying economy. I'm going to talk about dying trees. So okay, so I'll try and do a screen share just now and see. Good. So can you just give me an indication if you can see the screen?
Yes, Wilhelm, it's on.
Okay, great. So okay, I just want to figure out. Okay, so most of you would probably have seen something in the media over the last 2 or 3 years about this polyphagous shothole borer that started killing our trees a few years ago. And of course, there's a lot of good news, and as we know, there's also a lot of fake news. For example, the photograph in the top right bottom, or the bottom right here of this beetle, that's not even an ambrosia beetle, that's a leaf-eating beetle, so it's not a wood-eating beetle at all. So so I don't want to criticize any organization or so on, but we need to be careful what we believe and read in the media, also with regards to the shothole borer. What I can say is that on Sunday there will be another. Last night on SABC there was an interview with a colleague of mine that's working on several of the projects together with us at Stellenbosch University, Francois Roots, about the Vergelegen project, and there will be a feature also in Sunday Times on Sunday again, so you can keep your eyes open. So if the beetle on the right bottom is not the right one, this is the right one. So this is the polyphagous shothole borer. It's about 2 millimeters long. It attacks many different species of trees, boring into the tree. And when it bores into the tree, the tunnels that it creates, we call the gallery. And inside this gallery, the beetle, you will see the fungus that's growing there is sort of staining the wood around the gallery. So this is just a flipped open gallery with several female beetles in there. So what happens is one female bores in, she lays a lot of eggs. 1 out of 10 eggs is that tiny little male there, and then he mates with all his sisters in this gallery. They then eventually fly out and attack the next tree. But these beetles cannot digest wood, so they eat fungus. So they cultivate in these tunnels their own fungus. So it's a mold growing on the surface of the tunnel that you can see there, and that's the food of the beetle. But it's also that fungus that then kills the tree. So if you look at the attack hole, so this is a London plane tree. So you can see these scars on the tree. This is about 6 months or longer after the beetle attacked the tree. If you flip open the bark, you can see there's an entry hole into the tree. It forms some scars here already. If you cut open the branches, you can see the tunneling of the beetle and also the staining of the fungus. These discs come from a sort of subsequent on a single branch, and you can imagine that, I mean, the growth of the tree and the sap flow is in this outer layer of sapwood, that this then suffocates the tree and eventually kills the tree. And this is a London plane tree at the Everard Reed Gallery in Johannesburg. This picture was taken in April 2019. This picture I took in February this year. The tree is now completely dead. I'm not sure, I haven't been there since lockdown, whether the tree has been removed or not, but it's certainly a risk for cars or buildings in the environment. And the interesting thing is, if we go onto Google Earth, in March 2017, the same tree hasn't even been infested. So within a matter of 3 years, the fungus, the beetle and the fungus then really killed this big plane tree. And this is what we're seeing also happening in other parts of Johannesburg and the country. So in terms of these ambrosia beetles, so we talk about the polyphagous shottle borer form part of a group of beetles, the ambrosia beetles. There's been several of these that started to cause problems over the last 20 years. And this is mainly as a result of wood being moved around over the world with trade. And many of these actually originate from Southeast Asia, from where a lot of manufactured goods are shipped on pallets across the world. So the shottle borer was first determined in, or found in California in 2003, and then in 2008 in Israel. And at the same time, it started also killing avo trees in Israel and California, and that's in 2008. We found the beetle in 2017 in South Africa, and just this week there's a report out that the beetle has now also been found in Hawaii. So, but it is very clear that the beetle originates from Southeast Asia with its fungus. And in a native ecosystem, there's always checks and balances in place. So that's why the beetle is not really a big problem there, because trees has resistance and there's natural enemies of the beetle in those environments. But in South Africa, we found it for the first time in London plane trees in Pietermaritzburg in February 2017. This was a colleague of mine who was doing a survey in botanical gardens across the country for all kinds of tree diseases. We were able to find the beetle in the tunnel, and then also the fungus from the stain next to the tunnel on these plane trees. With DNA sequencing, we confirmed that this is Uvulaceae fornicatus, the polyphagous shottle borer, which is one of a group of 4 sister species. All of them are problematic, and the top 3 has been introduced into other areas. As you can see, they all originate from Southeast Asia. At this point, we only have fornicatus in South Africa, the polyphagous shottle borer, but in California, for example, and in Hawaii, they already have 2 of the 4. And then in Australia and Florida in the States, there's a different beetle. The fungus, again, with DNA sequences, we confirmed that the fungus that we have in South Africa is exactly the same fungus that the beetle carries in California and in Israel. So the current status of the spread of the beetle in South Africa is quite wide and far. Subsequent to Pietermaritzburg, very soon after that, we got a report from Peakernuts and Hartswater in the Northern Cape. We then also at more or less the same time, that was early 2018, heard about the beetle in Sandton from one of the arborists there. We drove down there and we confirmed that it's a beetle. within weeks after that, we found it down in George at Neisner. But in all these cases, although we have only found it in 2018, it was very clear that the beetle has been around for quite some time before that. The problem is in South Africa, there's no funding for research or monitoring for pest diseases in urban forest trees. So any urban, whether it's street trees or garden trees, there's not really funding for research on these. So for example, in our institute, most of our funding comes from the agricultural and commercial forestry industries. And that's obviously then where our focus is in terms of research and monitoring. If we had a system in place like they have in several European countries and the United States, where there are also systematic monitoring of botanical gardens and urban areas, we would have picked this problem up much, much earlier and probably could have avoided some of it. Now, if we think about the problem of the invasive in South Africa, it affects mainly, well, it affects trees across the board, and that is a big problem. Usually these pests are really just attacking, for example, avocado trees, or another one might go for eucalypts, or another one for pines. But very, very seldom you find a serious pest like this, especially on trees, that just go across the board in many, many different plant families, tree families, attacking all kinds of shapes and sizes of trees. 58 different families, I think, is the number at this point. It's families, not species. So very diverse host range, which means that the impact is also across the board. So we see it in urban areas where it's most dramatic at this point. We see it in native forests. Unfortunately, it's moving into our native forests in KwaZulu-Natal and also in the Southern Cape, Tsitsikamma, around George and Neisner. And then also we see it in agriculture and very, very little in wattle plantations, which some people, of course, might argue is not such a bad thing, that it's attacking wattle. But in agriculture, it's also a problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these three sectors and just show you what the impacts of these different sectors are. Just in terms of research, before I go there, because I'm sharing a little bit of research results, when I discuss the three sectors, we have now established what we call the PSHB Research Network. This has been going for more than 2 years already, where we are academics from 7 different universities in South Africa, and I think we're up to a total of 16 funded projects by masters and PhD students and some other survey projects in these institutions. So it's a big network. We're all working together. We try not to reinvent the wheel and really be effective in terms of the type of research that we do. And the 3 colored bands here are the urban forests on the right, the middle, the natural forests, and then on the left, the agricultural and commercial forestry areas. And then, of course, in our institute, we have a lot of international collaborations going on with experts in the field of bark and ambrosia beetles. So we also collaborate with the people in California. We're in contact with the people in Israel. So we talk to these people. So in urban forests, and that's, I guess, where most of your interest is, we see the impact across the board and very, very dramatic. This is currently the situation in Dunkeld and Sandton. Dunkeld, for those who don't know, is one of the oldest suburbs in Joburg, with very old oak trees especially, but also some other species. And you can see the dates here. In December last year, some of the big old oaks, English oaks, dying in the street, and the municipality started removing these in March this year, just before lockdown. And the impact on the environment is dramatic. We have an example here of a guy who bought a property, I guess probably close to 400 square meters or something. No, it must be more. So, but anyway, a huge property with a huge house, and at the back, the whole back half of the property is basically a forest. He bought it in November last year. Beautiful, beautiful place. unknowingly, and I'm pretty sure the previous owner knew it very well, that that all the trees in the back garden, these included planes, birch, so one massive London plane, birch, several oak trees, and a lot of maple trees. It just so happened that in that particular garden, all the species that was planted in the back there, and it was really a forest, are susceptible to the Shothole. And all these trees were infested. Last time I spoke to this guy, I think it was in April, he has spent more than 100,000 rand already in removing dead trees and trying to treat in vain some of the heavily infested other trees. So it's really having an economic impact. You can think of property values. I don't have figures for that. We are busy now with some statisticians at the University of Stellenbosch trying to model economic figures and get to rand values of the damage that this beetle is causing in urban areas, but also in the rest of the country. Similar situation down in George. I showed this slide at the previous convention last year. This is in a single street. All the dying oaks. Many of these have since been removed. Also in George, 1.5 century old oak tree in front of the Mother Church, Dutch Moederkerk there in George, and you can see it was cut down in February this year. So really sad sight. Fancourt, most of you will be familiar with. Most of the oaks are dying there as well. They have spent already 1.5 million rand on treatments and removal of dead trees, and it's just changing the landscape. I don't easily get emotional about trees and so on, but the last time I visited Fancourt, I got emotional just realizing what this landscape is going to look like when those trees are cut down, because they're going to be cut down within the next couple of months. And I mean, planting new trees is going to take some time to recover the whole environment. The beetle has been introduced. We found it for the first time in Somerset West in the Western Cape in April last year. My question is, I also had this slide on what's going to happen to the oak trees and in the whole environment there on the wine farms, Stellenbosch in the town. Those trees are going to die. My prediction is that within 5 years from now, there's probably not going to be more than 5% of those trees left. There's a very small number of English oaks that sort of have resistance to the borer. We don't understand why few of them have it, but the oaks are by far the most valuable, and together with the maples, the trees that die fastest. So don't try and replant oaks where oaks have been dying. You might try pin oaks, but pin oaks are also susceptible to a much lesser extent to this. So it's really a big question at the moment on what are the good trees then to plant. Vergelegen, the Oppenheimer wine estate in Somerset West. The outbreak in Somerset West was about 3 kilometers from where they are, and those of you who are familiar with Vergelegen would know that it's a beautiful environment with old trees. So they are sponsoring now a PhD project for 3 years on some pertinent questions in terms of which lures and which traps might be used to try and get the beetle out of the environment, but also for effective monitoring, and then also some treatment value. So we're doing this project together with the University of Stellenbosch. It's driven by a PhD student based at Stellenbosch University together with Francois Roots. And this is the project that's currently in the news. I think Vergelegen Estate have made sure that they get a little bit of publicity out of this. But we're really thankful, because this is the only project up to now where we have funding to work on urban type trees. So all the other projects that we had are either on native forests or agricultural crops. And we're battling to find funding for urban environments. In terms of agricultural crops, just briefly, pecan nuts are affected in Hartswater. And again, we have a situation where the beetle, I haven't mentioned that, but the beetle breeds in some trees. We call those reproductive posts, but in the majority of trees that it attacks, it doesn't successfully breed. So it attacks a tree, you put the fungus in, the fungus might or might not kill the tree, but that tree is not a risk to the environment apart from falling over maybe at some point. But in a reproductive host like the English oak, the population of this beetle is just increasing and uh, just expanding in the environment, and it really caused massive, massive outbreaks. And the situation in Hartswater is a very clear example of this. This is an aerial photograph of the Hartswater. So this is the town, actually it's the town of Jan Kempdorp on the southern side of the Vallards irrigation scheme. In the middle block there is the agricultural high school, and then in the area surrounded by the yellow line is the currently infested area, and these dark green spots, not in the circles, but the others in between, are all pecan orchards. All these trees are affected, um, but we've been monitoring now for 2 years, and it's very clear that the oak trees at the agricultural high school, and then the previous oak tree I showed you was actually um, on the farm here, where this guy had infested oaks on his yard that infested his own orchard. So he has since removed all of those trees. The oak trees at the agricultural school, most of them have died, but there's still some of them that hasn't died, in which the beetle still breeds. And we actually got, we monitor every 2 weeks. We've got traps in the environment to see how the populations of the beetle go over seasons. And it's very, very clear that the source of the beetle in this environment caused these repeated waves of outbreaks of the beetle and re-attacking the same trees season after season and sometimes several times in the season. Fortunately, at this point, we're quite convinced that pecan nut trees are not dying of it, and that it's not really, so the beetle doesn't breed in pecan nut trees, therefore it's not spreading north or further. It just comes from this oak orchard. And this is a very important lesson also for us, for municipalities, that you have to remove these reproductive hosts. Otherwise, you have just this continuous source of beetles. And the more beetles there are, the more they tend to go for all kinds of other hosts. They usually go for their preferred host first, the plane trees, the oaks, the maples. But if there's too many beetles, then they start going for all the other hosts in the environment. We have also found it on avocado and macadamia in South Africa, but again, they're not in orchards and not causing big problems. We're also working, Francois Roots at Stellenbosch, with the fruit industries down there and also the grape industry to test what the susceptibility of different fruit cultivars and species are. And that's in progress. But at this point, there's no agricultural crop that I think is seriously threatened, apart maybe from avocado. But we've only seen the beetle in avocados in backyards and cities, and not yet in the avocado industry. But we're working very closely with them right from when we detected the beetle in South Africa to monitor and keep our eyes open for this. So then in terms of the native trees, this is my biggest concern. All the other trees can be replanted with something else. The problem is the beetle also goes for several different native tree species. You've seen these pictures before. Some of the acacia species are very susceptible. Erythrina, several of them is very susceptible, but now remember, most of the native trees that we plant are planted from seed. The moment you plant from seed, you would know that there's a lot more genetic diversity within a population. So if you have 100 erythrinas from seed and you have 100 uh, eucalypt trees from cuttings from the same tree, you have a completely different scenario, because in erythrinus, there will be a range of susceptibility from very susceptible to quite resistant, everything sort of in between. But we do see erythrinas dying and some big ones dying. So it does have an impact. It does have to be monitored, and it's sort of unpredictable at this point which particular erythrina tree will survive and which not. Then some protea species, and then especially on Virgilia, we're really concerned because Virgilia is a pioneer species in our forests, and there we're really worried about what the impact might be in the longer term. So we've got 3 research projects, 2 down in the Tsitsikamma around George, Knysna, and right to the end of the Tsitsikamma forest on the eastern end, but then also in the KwaZulu-Natal area at 28 sites from the south to the north of Durban. And here we are monitoring and trying to, over a 2-year period, this was seriously hampered now, our monitoring efforts with COVID, to understand what the impact on different species is and also how the beetle is spreading into the forests. So again, as I said, Podocarpus is also infested, but we haven't seen a single Podocarpus that looks as if it's dying as a result of this. So I'm not so concerned about Podocarpus, but we've seen several Bugelia trees dying of the beetle and fungus. So at the moment, this is an old list that I'm showing here, but the current numbers are at the bottom here. Is we've got more than 100 species, 140 species of trees in South Africa that we have found to be susceptible. More than 35, we're probably up to about 50 now. We're still confirming these projects in the Tsitsikamma, how many species of native trees are susceptible. And then of these, on the left-hand column, those are the reproductive host trees. They are the ones that's also most likely to die. And the ones that need to be removed from the environment once they're infested because they're a source of beetles to the environment. So just something to think about these lists of hosts that you see on websites and so on, is that you have a variety. I mean, with COVID, we are all one species and people react differently. Now we're dealing with many different species of trees, but within each species, as I explained, you have different factors contributing to the susceptibility of an individual tree. So any tree that's healthily growing and in a good condition is prone to be much more resistant to the attack, to the fungus and disease than a stress tree. That is the reality with English oaks, is that there's a reason why they're called English oaks. They are not South African oaks. They don't belong in South Africa and our climate. And they all mostly stress. I mean, look at any English oak, and most of them have got some dying branches and so on. They're not really a good match for our environment, especially as things are getting hotter and drier. So, so any stress factors just contribute to the susceptibility. And then something that we think a non-reproductive host, like a jacaranda, for example. We see here and there a jacaranda infested. They're not, beetles don't reproduce in them. But then in California, they're on the reproductive host list because there was a single jacaranda tree in which the beetle reproduced. But that must have been a very highly stressed, unhealthy jacaranda anyway. So the question is, should we then really have jacaranda on the reproductive host list? Because it's 99% of them are not reproductive hosts. And this is very difficult. So we find a species, one tree with a fungus or a beetle in it, it goes onto the list, but that might not be a good reflection of what's happening in the whole in that particular species. So just also bear this in mind when you look at these host lists. The way this thing spreads, as I said, especially through pellets, they also can fly short distances. They reckon in California, in an area without wind, like Johannesburg, with very little wind, the natural spread is about 1.5 to 3 kilometers, maybe a year, while the most of the spread occurs with the movement of infested wood. So trees that's been cut down that's infested, we have very good examples of that. And then our concern was that we have seen attacks in several commercial nurseries on bag trees over the last 2 years, and we found infested or infected trees where the beetle attacked, put the fungus in, and you can actually get the fungus out. So we did a whole year project last year with an honor student at the nursery to really and get numbers onto this and see what are the real risks that nursery trees pose. Because at one point Environmental Affairs. All of you might know Guy Preston, who's retired now. He was really concerned that nursery stock might be a big problem. But what we've seen at this point is that we couldn't find a single, so we found many different bag trees that were infested by the beetle. And in one particular nursery, they had a whole row of maple trees that was infested, heavily infested, and in which the beetle reproduced. So there was large numbers of beetles in this nursery. But and a lot of the nursery stock was infested attacked by the beetle. Fungus was in there, but in not a single one of them the beetle reproduced. So moving a tree with a fungus in it doesn't pose any, that fungus doesn't spread by itself. It will kill that tree, but it's not going to spread. There's no evidence whatsoever in any literature that this fungus on its own will just spread. So it's only associated with the beetle. So it needs the beetle to be moved around and to put into trees. So at this point, we really believe that nursery stock does not pose a big problem. We, however, I'm not saying that you shouldn't monitor, you should be careful, check out, especially your plants that are thicker than 2.5, 3 centimeters. You might actually find some beetles reproducing in there, but at this point, we haven't seen a single tree in the nursery in which the beetle reproduce, where that tree might become a source of beetle. But what we have seen in several cases, I mean, here's just how it spread internationally. But to us, this is our biggest concern, is that you have these informal and formal tree fellers that come in, cut down trees, and go and sell it as firewood, go and dump it in any place possible. And we've got very good examples. I've shown you this example last year of wood that was moved from Sandton City area to Lanseria. We got to hear about it. We went there. This was maple wood infested with the beetle. I took one piece of wood. From that piece, I got 44 females. Each female can lay up to 30 eggs, which give you, what's the number here? It's more than 1,400 babies from a single piece of firewood that's being moved. This pile of wood was dumped right next to an English oak. The oak tree was already infested. By the time we got there, quite heavily infested. This was 3 weeks after the wood was delivered. And then wood chips is also a risk, but only very coarse fresh chips. So chips smaller than 2 centimeters. There's a new paper out a month ago or so from the States, again, where they're looking at chips. And it's very clear that chipping kills by far. You have like less than 2% survival rate in coarse chips. That's chips bigger than 2.5 centimeters. If it's smaller, then there's virtually no survival for a couple of days. So to us, one of the best treatments is actually chipping infested wood and composting it. So cover it with a sheet of plastic and just let it lie there for a couple of weeks, and the beetles won't survive that. So I spoke about nursery stock already, that we don't think it's really a major threat. And then just in terms of control and management, there's really at this point, there's still there's chemicals, insecticides, and fungicides, a combination that you can inject into trees, and that can extend the life of an infested tree, or maybe save a newly infested tree with not too many infestations. The problem is this poison that you put into the tree doesn't stay there, so you have to repeatedly treat this tree. It's very expensive and time consuming. So this is only an option for high value trees in a garden. So if you have 1 or 2 very big trees that you really have the money to spend on, you can maybe protect them in that way. But the stuff that's at the moment commercially marketed in South Africa, there's no evidence, scientific evidence, and I can guarantee you that that aspirin dissolved in something is not a fungicide. Aspirin is not a fungicide. It's a plant growth hormone, a plant defense hormone. I can't go into the details. You can ask me questions about that later. But So the management strategy is to really, for the municipalities, to have dedicated dumping sites where these wood cutters can go in and dump the wood, and where that wood then is either chipped or solarized, plastic left in the sun to get rid of the beetle. The other option is obviously to then replace these trees with resistant tree species. And then the big thing, I think, in terms of landscaping is to, I know it's beautiful. I mean, I've just seen a house over the weekend in one of the estates of Pretoria with a whole birch forest front of this house in very neat rows. It's beautiful. But if the beetle gets there, those trees are all going to die. If they had a mix of species there, the garden would have been much more resilient. That is also in terms of climate change, drier, hotter climates, is that in the cities, we should really go for more diverse plantings of trees and avoid these long streets, as beautiful as they might be, of monoculture, where you have the same tree for 5 kilometers in a long street. It's just not a good idea to do that at this point. We're going to see more of these type of pests and diseases occurring in the country as trade increases. So it's really something to be avoided. And yeah, so this is a photo I actually took in Sandton. So people are trying all kinds of very weird things to protect their trees. But at this point, as I said, the only things that's really doable is good management, and then these stem injections, which on the longer term is not really also the best option. So the impact is really not all trees will die. The urban areas are the worst affected at this point. Property and farm values might decrease. I can tell you stories about pecan farms where the farm couldn't be sold. This guy wanted to sell his farm because he got cancer. Of course, there's beetles on the farm. The bank wouldn't offer a loan to the buyer, and which is actually ridiculous. They spoke to me. I said, these trees are not going to die, but still they considered it a risk. So this does have an economic effect. In terms of agriculture at this point, as I said, I think our biggest risk are avocados, but we are really watching it very carefully. And I think with good management in agricultural environments, getting rid of castor bean, and that's also in the biggest state. Castor bean as a weed is a good idea, because castor bean is also a reproductive host, and it's big, as you know, a big weed in KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga areas, and so on. So, and then in the native ecosystems, we're not going to see dead forests, but there might be a shift in ecosystems, and especially if keystone native species like Virgilia, which are pioneer species, are affected, it's going to affect the long-term ability of the forest to regenerate. As I said, we're a big network. We're trying to do our best at this point. We're restricted a lot by funding, but there's several projects going. The problem is with these things, there are no quick fixes, no quick answers. You really have to monitor over 2 years and 2 sets of seasons if you want to understand the impact of many of these things. Take time, and unfortunately, research costs money. And as you know, our government doesn't have too much of that available at the moment. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Wilhelm, it's Corna here. Do you want to read the one very long question in the text box?
Okay, let me just open. Currently doing. Okay, so I'm reading it. My name is Lerato, an advanced diploma in sustainable horticulture. I'm currently doing research on the ecological impacts of tree loss due to PSHB. I was doing my data collection at the Zimbabwe resort. I noticed that the Brachycalia, or what's it, Brachyolina discolor, the coast silver oak, was seriously infested when compared to other trees. So my question is, can the tree species be a factor to the level of infestation? Obviously, different tree species, as I explained, react differently, and even within a species, you can have different reactions. And then, I mean, I've been to Zimbabwe. That's one of our monitoring sites also. So we should really get in contact. You should contact me, please. so that we can go to the site together the next time we're down there. We haven't been there since lockdown. We've resumed our trials down in Tsitsikamma, but not there yet. So that we can go and have a look. Unfortunately, I can't remember from the top of my head. I mean, we've just in the Durban area, we've found more than 50 native species of trees, and so there's some very strange noise outside here. So I can't remember which species are all infested in the area, but we can have, and for those so the list is expanding, but we need to confirm. So what we get a fungus from there, we do DNA sequencing on the fungus to confirm that it's a fungus. So it's not just a matter of looking at the tree to determine whether it's infested, but we actually have to isolate and determine either the beetle or the fungus or both with DNA sequences to really confirm. There's about 6,000 species of these type of beetles. Less than 20 of them kill trees. So we really need to make sure that the ones that we think is this beetle are really the cause. Any tree that dies will get all the secondary beetles that's coming in and boring into the tree. So a tree with holes in it is a very natural thing. The question is it what is cause and effect? What caused the death of that tree? And is it really that beetle that you find in the tree? So a lot of the questions that we get are really just trees that's infested with secondary beetles. Joanne asked, you talk mainly about exotics with this problem. What about endemic trees within a specified area, mainly in the Eastern Cape, please? So in the Eastern Cape, we have found the beetle. We have confirmed it from, I must think carefully, from Port Alfred and Grahamstown, not any other places, if I remember correctly. We've got a student based at Rose University in Grahamstown. He's involved in the eastern part of the Tsitsikamma area. Unfortunately, so this is a government-funded project, and we just don't have the capacity to extend. So if you know about the specific area and the specific ecosystem in which this beetle is occurring, you should please get in contact with us so that we can see if it's a unique system where we're not monitoring, if we have the capacity to start looking into that as well. But the monitoring is a very, very intensive exercise, and these students of us spend almost 6 months of the year. So they go, they spend in the field. So they go for 3 weeks at a time to read these trials, going back to the same plots, the same trees every 3 months, labeling every tree, measuring, counting holes and everything to really try and understand what's happening there. But if there are areas that you have seen the beetle moving into native areas, please contact us and let us know. In terms of biological control of PSHB, a big part of the funding that we got from the Department of Environmental Affairs is actually to look at biological control. So, of course, in the longer term, that would be the only option, especially in our native forest. In my opinion, we need something that can actually follow the beetle into the forest, go and get it in its hole where it sits in the tree and kills it there. And the only type of thing that can do this is usually a parasitoid wasp. So there are several options for biocontrol. There's also fungi that cause disease on these beetles. But in those cases, you have to go and spray every single tree with that. So together with the Californians, we are now embarking on going to Indonesia and Vietnam to native ecosystems and try and search for appropriate biocontrol agents that we might then bring back and work with, and don't be too concerned about bringing back stuff. We are fully equipped with very, very good quarantine facilities. We've done biocontrol work for several of these insect pests off trees. So it takes usually about 3 to 5 years to confirm that that biocontrol agent actually kills the thing that it wants to, that you wanted to kill, but that it doesn't pose a risk to anything else like bees or any beneficial insects and so on. So, any other questions?
Professor De Beer, we have from Diana. Diana, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, so there.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Professor. Hello.
Hi.
I put the questions in the chat, but they are very long. Yeah, I understood you said that there is no funding to monitor and maintain urban spaces in South Africa. So that was one of the causes you could not detect the arrival of the beetle earlier, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So at the moment, there's virtually no monitoring happening in our gardens, in our harbors. That is where your biggest port of entry for any types of pest insects are. And I mean, if you go and look at other countries like New Zealand, Australia, the States, and so on, they've got, in every big harbor, they've got full-time staff there that actually go and inspect as many as possible of the stuff that's arrival. In our country, it's simply not happening. So there's no monitoring strategy happening.
Okay, thank you. I have like several questions. What are your thoughts about the prevention of the introduction of alien species? I mean, pests, insects, or whatever other species. Whether there are strategies or not in the region, in South Africa.
So just to repeat, just repeat the last part of your question.
Yes. What are your thoughts about the prevention of the introduction of exotic species or alien species in South Africa? I mean, whether there are strategies or not, if they are effective or not. I mean, it's just, what are your thoughts about it?
So, I mean, to us in our institute, I mean, this is virtually all the pests and diseases that we deal with have been introduced into the country. And as I said, most of these actually come in through our harbor. So this is very, very difficult to control. And especially with the, I took a slide out of my presentation that showed the traffic of trade ships on the global map over the world, with the increase in just, I mean, we talked about, David talked about online training and so on. Everybody now orders stuff online. The scary part is we have actually found cases where insect traders in Johannesburg, pet traders have brought in a very, very dangerous big stick insect from South America that's killing forests there, and they brought it as pets into South Africa. And part of the instructions to the people is that if you don't want it anymore, this thing is really resilient. You can just go and release it in your back garden. And I mean, so unfortunately, that is the reality. So we really, in terms of monitoring, that's the first step, of course, in trying to prevent. Your second step would be, if there's good monitoring and you can detect an outbreak very early, and that's what we attempted in Somerset West with this beetle, is to do eradication, to go in, and in an environment in Somerset West, we did a 1.5 kilometer radius around the source of where we first found the beetle, and they removed or treated all the reproductive hosts in that area, and yet the beetle has now expanded its range and so on. So it's really, really difficult once it has established. But another way would be to also hang traps in your harbors, close to your harbors. That's what the states are doing, where things that fly out from wood or products that's being delivered in the harbor can be caught in traps, and you can see, okay, something has arrived here. We must be on the lookout for that. But it's not happening.
Okay, thank you. You said about having species resistant to the fungus and the insect. Would that be like exotic or native tree species? I mean, what species are resistant?
So in both, among both the exotics and obviously a lot of native trees are resistant. So this is now again a problem. So what happened in California is on the website of the University of California, together with the USDA, they have actually put updated lists of susceptible trees, reproductive host trees, and based on very careful surveys, they also made a list of resistant host trees. However, then after some point, this list disappeared, and I then met one of the Californians at a small symposium in Florida 2 years ago, and I said to her, but I mean, why did you remove the resistant tree list? Because that's so valuable. That's the thing that we really want. And she said, no, what actually happened is that landscapers threatened to sue the university when they used this list that the university said is resistant trees, when they planted some of these trees and they so and then unfortunately the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, because as I said, it's when do you say a tree is resistant? When, in my opinion, jacaranda is resistant, because I haven't seen a single jacaranda dying, but we do see maybe 5% or even less of jacarandas being attacked, and you can actually get the fungus from there, but they don't die, they don't develop disease. And then you have the other side of the coin, as I explained with oaks, where 95% of the oaks will die, but 5% is resistant. And the only way to really then make these lists is to decide where your cutoff points are. At what number of trees would you say a species is resistant? And you can only do that if you have surveyed for every species 100 or 200 trees in a specific area, and we simply don't have the capacity to do that. No, so what I'm saying is, in Pretoria, for example, the beetle has spread mainly by means of maples and box elders, but because we have primarily jacaranda and white stinkwood, the Caldas trees in our streets, the impact is not going to be nearly as visible and as much as, for example, in Johannesburg or down in the Cape, where you have a lot of oak trees and more maples, and we also have plains. So the plains, but among the plains, it's also interesting. We see quite a lot of variation. Some plains are completely resistant. Some will die, but the plains definitely die slower than the oaks. The problem is, during that whole time, the beetle, the trees are still very much alive, but the beetles are reproducing in there. So the plains are reproductive hosts for the beetles, and that's a big concern.
Thanks for the questions. Thanks, Professor De Beer. This was really informative, and people tend to think when things aren't in the news that they're gone. So thanks for telling us that it's still around. And we still have to look out for it, and hopefully soon we'll be able to get an answer to the problems.
No, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure whether I should say it was a pleasure giving you all this bad news, but the reality is, yes, the beetle is still around and very active.
Okay. Thanks very much. I think if you've got any other questions, you can probably also contact Professor De Beer. Okay, so we're just going to quickly look at our sponsors or our partners again. There's a few of them, so have a look and enjoy. And thanks very much to our partners.
Hunter Industries is a family-owned global company that provides high-quality, efficient solutions for irrigation and outdoor lighting. A diverse range of products can be seen everywhere, from residential landscapes to stadiums, national landmarks, theme parks, city parks, commercial complexes, hotels, and municipal buildings around the world. Whether you're from New York, Shanghai, Sydney, Paris, or Cape Town, the odds are you've probably encountered Hunter product somewhere along the way.
Now you can enhance the beauty of your garden by using Mayford seeds with a full range of vegetables, flowers, herbs, and lawn grasses. Mayford seed packs are hermetically sealed and date stamped, ensuring a quality product that you can trust. To grow your own vegetables, herbs, flowers, and lawn, explore our seed stand at any leading retailer for sheer inspiration. Mayford Quality Seeds, the leading brand.